everybody. We're fired up now. I guess maybe we need to get really pumped up because this is an important one, very important talk that we're doing. So let's get excited. And coming to you from Bloomington, Indiana is Kurt Bonk. And I'm going to host this session on schema theory. If I don't have a head, that would be an improper schema. You would only see the middle part of my body, a headless man. You would have some dissonance, I guess, in your brain, if in fact I came to you without a head and was talking to you somehow. Okay, so today's topic is very, very important because we all need schema to survive. We all need heads to survive, and maybe we need our mouths to survive, and sometimes I probably should keep my mouth shut. Okay, schema theory and meaningful learning. Okay, I'm coming to you from Indiana University, where I'm a professor at. Look at that, Indiana University. And my email is cjbonk@indiana.edu. So write to me with questions about meaningfulness and schema theory. And we will go on into this important topic now. Okay, we want things to be meaningful, not arbitrary, not spit back at us verbatim, not inert knowledge, unlinked knowledge, as Alfred Whitehead North once said. We want to have things to be incorporated into our existing cognitive structures. Deliberate effort to link new information to old information, relating information together. Our ideas that we already have, our prior knowledge, being linked to existing knowledge. We want to be subsuming information into what we already know. Prior knowledge is perhaps one of the most important concepts of educational psychology and of this class. Trying to understand what students already know and to make new knowledge meaningful to that, to what students' existing mental structures are, to what students' understandings are, so as to, in effect, make things understandable, clear, well organized. But at times we want it to be difficult. At times you want them to struggle a bit with the new information, right? And make sense of it, having to accommodate information, as Piaget and others pointed out. So, we'll move on here. Rote learning is arbitrary. We don't want that. We don't want things just, repeated over and over again with little affect, little learning commitment, little linkage to our prior knowledge or scant linkage. Okay, here's a conversation of college students. Did you order it? Yeah, it'll be here in about 45 minutes. Oh, well, I've got to leave before then, but save me a couple of slices, okay? And a beer or two to wash them down with. What is that? Got a beer? Sounds good. What's the conversation about? You see the image there of a pizza. But I never said pizza in the dialogue or conversation. The word pizza was never mentioned. You heard about attributes of a pizza eating event, but we never said that. Do you know what they were talking about? Okay. We didn't really mention it, but you have a schema that can be called to bear on that problem or issue. Data-driven or stimulus-driven processing occurs when no schema exists from which to process information. There's a typo there. The individual examines all information and proceeds through a careful decision-making process. So if you don't have a schema, and you don't really figure out what something is, you have to rely on data and eventually form a new schema or new understanding or new representation. Schema-driven processing occurs when an individual responds to a situation, a problem, a stimulus, by evoking a programmed response, a behavioral script or schema. This is done without any more data collection or analysis. You just assumed it was a pizza, or you could assume I've got an apple here that I'm holding up. It might not be an apple, okay? But we're going to call it the schema for apple anyways, and assume that when I chew into it, and in fact, it's not plastic that I'm eating. In fact, it's healthy for me, potentially. And I'll be maybe a better instructor as a result. of eating that apple, and we might assume that it has a stem on the top and maybe some little signage on the side that in fact shows us that this is in fact a 4015 apple, not an ordinary apple, but quite a delicious apple at that. Maybe I should get another bite. That's pretty good. Okay, schema theory. Schemata are used to guide encoding, organization, and retrieval of information. Schemata reflect prototypical properties or experiences encountered by an individual, integrated over many instances. Schemas about ourselves or other people, about food, like an apple. I can still toss that apple in the air, it's just a little slimy when I catch it. And mechanical devices, a car, going to a church, being in a restaurant. We have schemas and scripts and plans, frameworks for all these things. Types of schemas: social schemas, knowing what to do in particular social events. Person schemas, knowing about people or particular people. Idealized person schemas are called prototypes. The word is used for any generalized schema. Self-schemas are schema about yourself. We hold idealized or projected selves, possible selves. Role schemas are about proper behaviors in given situations. And event schemas are about what happens in specific situations. The prisoner story. The prisoner story. Now here's one for you. Listen carefully. Rocky slowly got up from the mat, planning his escape. He hesitated for a moment and thought things were not going well. What bothered him the most was being held, especially since the charge against him had been weak. He considered the present situation. The lock that held him was strong, and he thought he could break that lock. He knew that his timing would have to be perfect. Rocky was aware that this was because of early roughness that he was being penalized so severely. Too severely, much too severely from his point of view. The situation had become frustrating, and the pressure had been grinding on him for way too long. He was being ridden unmercifully. Rocky was getting angry now. He was ready to make his move, and he knew that his success or failure would depend on what he did in the next few seconds. Can you think of another title for this? Aha! The Wrestler. He was not a prisoner at all. Rocky, in fact, was in a wrestling match, being ridden unmercifully. It was time for him to make his move and become successful and get the championship. Okay. Yes, The Wrestler. You're right. This is a very smart class I have here. More properties on schema. A schema may be formed and used without an individual conscious awareness. Although schemata are assumed to reflect individual experience, they are also assumed to be shared across individuals, or at least within a culture. Schema help us make sense of the world. Schema, in effect, help us survive in the world. Having the proper schema to call to bear on a given problem is one way of being successful in life, in effect. And so we want to think about what schema students are bringing to bear on problems that we present. If I say this is about prisoners, you'll bring up prisoner schemas to help you understand that information. You'll think about someone being in a penitentiary or institute of some kind. If I was to tell you it was about wrestling, you might think about that. Okay? There are ways in which to focus attention. There are problems of bringing up schema too early, and that it might inhibit creativity. It might focus us on the wrong aspects of a particular situation, or we're not able to see what the true problem is in a situation because we're all bringing the same schema up, and it might be the wrong schema. We might not really need to bring up any schema until we have all the data first. So put those things away. Once formed schemata are relatively stable, we know more about schemata, how schemata are used than how they are acquired. And you know, it's hard to really find that region of the brain where the schemata are. You know, where is that schema? You know, what really causes a schema to form, right? What are good ways in which to help students form a schema about dogs and cats and restaurants and planes and so forth, right? Okay. It is time for a story. So if you're getting tired out there and you need a story told, well, I've got a solution. Listen to my little story. The procedure is simple. It's really quite simple, in fact. First, you arrange things into different groups, depending upon their makeup. Of course, one pile may be sufficient, depending upon how much there is to do. If you have to go somewhere else due to lack of facilities, that is the next step. Otherwise, you are pretty well set. It is important not to overdo any particular endeavor. That is, it is better to do too few things at once than too many. In the short run, this may not seem important, but complications from doing too many can easily arise. A mistake can be expensive as well. The manipulation of the appropriate mechanisms should be self-explanatory, and we need not dwell on it here. At first, the whole procedure will seem complicated. Soon, however, it'll become just another facet of life. It is difficult to foresee any end to this task in the immediate future, but that no one can tell. Try to recall that story. Sorry, I really didn't give you enough time there, but you'll have more time later. Right now, I'm going to tell you what that story was about. Washing clothes. In fact, there are 18 ideas in that washing clothes little story. If I didn't give you a title, you would likely remember just a few ideas from it. If I give you a title, you might remember twice as many, up to 6 ideas. After rereading, if I give you a title after reading it, it really doesn't enhance all that much. So giving a title is before you read is important in bringing the schema up, bringing the schema to bear on the problem. So in effect, we want to give an advanced organizer, which I'll come to later, that in this case being the title. And when you have that, we can call up common things that have happened to us in the past, washing clothes. Simple things like washing clothes, right? John Bransford, who's been around forever, had a study in 1972. Bransford is famous for anchored instruction, which I talk about in another lesson, but in his early work in psychology, he was doing priming tasks and schema theory tasks. He found that if you do not have a schema, then it is difficult to understand the information. One group had the title, washing clothes, the other group was not given the schema. In the recall test, the group that did not have the schema recalled less items, and the group that did recalled many more. Other research on schemas and scripts, like that research done after the Watergate inquiry in the U.S., found John Dean's testimony was problematic, did not match what actually was said, that Dean had used the wrong schema for what actually happened in the Oval Office to unintentionally distort the truth. Okay? Bartlett's work in the 1930s got at issues of schema. He found interfering effect of prior knowledge, that actually having prior knowledge can be a bad thing. Prior knowledge isn't always a good thing. It can actually cause you to remember less. In effect, you might omit details or add or embellish on the stories beyond what you actually heard because you have a schema, you have a prior knowledge that you're bringing up that really isn't relevant per se. Okay? Bransford and Franks in 1979 talked about related bits of information, individual sentences that get integrated into semantic holes, that people try and make sense of things by creating integrated holes. Bauer, Black, and Turner said college students get confused with stated and unstated actions within a script. They recall events in an order in which they think they should occur, in which they normally occur, even if they didn't occur. Loftus's research forever, Loftus and Palmer and others, and she's a famous one for court cases where people actually have false memories. So she finds that people alter their memory of events, like a car accident, based on what they think should happen and suggestions of what happened. A play that it has a basic script, but each time it's performed, the details will differ, is sort of like a schema. You know, we'll go through that play. I go through this class and teach it over and over, but it's always going to be a little bit different. But overall, the same kind of script overall is done. A theory, in that it enables us to make predictions from an incomplete information by filling in missing details and default values, is similar to a script. So it's similar. A schema and script are similar to plays. They're similar to theories. In effect, they're basic structures. They're skeletons from which to place other values. They're jumping off stages. They're ways in which to make sense of the world, but they're not faultless. There are problems within the use of schemas, within the use of theories, and so forth. Computer program is similar in that it enables us to actively evaluate and parse information that we see. So a script is an organized body of knowledge. Roger Schenck and Abelson's work in the 70s, and Roger Schenck is now famous in goal-seeking behavior, goal-directed learning, problem-based learning, and artificial intelligence in education. He's written many books you may or may not have read. Organized body of knowledge about a sequence of events or actions like going to a restaurant. Useful for frequently enacted or conventional behavior, contains general specifications of the order of an event. A script, activated by words or phrases that refer to the script, like talking about drinking a beer while having a pizza. We have a script for pizza eating. Cognitive scripts can be acquired either directly or indirectly by going through a process repeatedly or indirectly, watching a film, a movie, hearing a story, having a conversation, or role models like Bandura's research that we talked about earlier in this class on cognitive and social role modeling, social cognitive theory. Schenck and Abelson suggest that schema is a type of script for an event, the restaurant script. The scripts enable us to remember situations and parts that are missing or implicit. Okay? Each schema is a type of script. That's what they say, each schema. We enter into a restaurant. We look for a table. We decide where to go. We go get the table. We sit down. We order things. We choose our food. Our waiter arrives. We give our waiter our food. We talk. The cook prepares the food, and we eat the food. Cook gives the food to the waiter. The waiter delivers the food. We eat and we talk. Leaving the restaurant. The waiter gives us a bill. We look at the bill. We calculate a tip. We give a tip. We get our belongings. We pay the bill. We leave the restaurant. We enter. We order. We eat, and we leave. We have a script for going through that restaurant situation. And we can go through it time and again. And it's going to be fairly similar each time we go through it. I give this talk. It's very similar each time we do it. I could turn around a bit once in a while, but it's not going to be that much different. Okay? I could throw chairs at my students, just pick them up and just throw them across the room. That would be a bit harmful, and I don't think they want me doing that. But normally I have the same kind of process that I go through in doing a talk. Although normally I have students in the room. In this case, I have no students, so I have to kind of ad-lib a bit and pretend that I have some students with me. Okay, so we've got the scripts for restaurants, script research, Bowers research. The subjects were told the restaurant stories, but the order was in the incorrect order. When they recalled the stories, they had to put the correct order together. The extra bits had been put in that the subjects felt appropriate and fitted the script. So if you take out part of the information, and so my initial research was on scripts and schemas where we gave people scrambled stories, or we had to make up a story, or partial stories, or canonically correct or standard stories. Those that got the canonically correct story remembered more than those that got the scrambled ones. Those that could make up a story remembered more than those that didn't make up a story. So calling your schemas and scripts to bear. Well, here's a story. John at the dentist. John is at the dentist. John is waiting. There are two people before John. After a while, it is his turn. He sees his hair getting shorter. After a while, he may get up. He can go home. Now that doesn't sound right at all. He's at the dentist and his hair's getting shorter. Whoa, wait a minute here. No, 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 no. I'm all messed up. You've screwed me up. You've really messed with my mind here. You told me John was at the dentist. I called up a dentist script, and you didn't. Dr. Bonk, you messed me up because I had a dentist in mind. They're cutting my teeth, they're drilling, and they're putting my crown on and all this stuff. But no, 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 no. He was getting his hair cut, after all. You're a tricky guy. Keep in mind, you don't want to ever take a test from me. John was at the hairdresser's. John is waiting. There are two people before him. After a while, it is his turn. He sees his hair getting shorter. After a while, he may get up. He may go home. Now, there's a story where the schema and script match what actually happens in the text. And I'm going to remember more because I had the right title. Simple things like titles go a long ways towards learning. Think about what your title is when you create a lesson, when you have a week in the semester in your syllabus. What titles do you use when you write a newsletter article or a story or a paper? Titles are key. What happened each time? What happened each time the story was read? Here's another story. Oh, I love stories, don't you? Here is time. It's story time. Once there was a big gray fox who lived in a cave near a forest. One day he became hungry. He needed food very badly. Could get his apple, chew on that. He decided he wanted fish for dinner. I want to join him too. And he knew where one could be found. So he went to his favorite stream. He dipped his hand into the water. This story continues. It's not over yet. He came up with a big gray fish. He was so happy that he ran home to tell his mother that he caught it all by himself. Now, recall that story. Sorry, time is up. For the sake of time in this class, you could have paused the system and recalled it. So hit the pause button now, and when you've recalled it, hit the start button. Story of the fox. The fox. Once there was a big gray fox is a setting. Who lived in a cave near a forest is also a setting. One day he became hungry. Event. He needed food very badly. That's a goal. He decided that he wanted fish for dinner. A sub-goal. And he knew where one could be found. Sub-goal 3. So he went to his favorite stream, an attempt. Dipped his hand in the water. Also attempt. Came up with a big gray fish. Outcome. He was so happy. Reaction. Then he ran home. Attempt. To tell his mother that. Goal. He caught it all by himself. Outcome. Recall that story. Hit the pause button. Pause it now. And now restart that. There are people who study story grammar, people who study the way in which we learn from stories. There's a long history on this from folks at Wisconsin, Minnesota, and other places that have been looking at those such and such story grammars or story starters, okay? Interesting area. It was my first publication back in my first major publication for psychology anyhow. I had a couple others before that back in 1990 in contemporary educational psychology. We got a new story. I know you like stories, so now we're going to give you a new story. He was so happy that he ran home. Tell his mother that. He caught it all by himself. He decided he wanted fish for dinner. And he knew where one could be found. He came up with a great big fish. And once there was a big gray fox who lived in a cave near a forest. So he went to his favorite stream, dipped his hand in the water. One day he became hungry. And he needed food very badly. Pause this for a second. Pause. And now recall. What's different about each of those recalls? Right? What's different about each time that you're recalling that information? All right? It's different, right? It's different because you have a scrambled story. Scrambled stories are more difficult to recall than non-scrambled stories. Okay? So, let's keep going here. And we actually studied this, and people do not recall as much. War of Ghosts. One night, two young men from Ugalak went down to the river to hunt seals, and while they were there, it became foggy and calm. Then they thought they heard war cries, and they thought, maybe this is a war party. They escaped to the shore and hid behind a log. Now canoes came up, and they heard noises of paddles and saw one canoe coming up to them. There were 5 men in the canoe, and they said, what do you think? We wish to go take you along. We are going up the river to make war on the people. One of the young men said, I have no arrows. Arrows are in the canoe, they said. We will not go along. I might be killed. My relatives do not know where I have gone. But you, he said, turning to the other, may go with them. So one of the young men went, but the other one returned home. And the warriors went on up the river to the town on the other side of Kalama. The people came down to the water, and they began to fight, and many were killed. But presently the young man heard one of the warriors say, quick, let us go home. That Indian has been hit. Now he thought, oh, they are ghosts. They did not feel sick, he did not feel sick, but they said he had been shot. So the canoes went back to Ugalak, and the young man went ashore to his house and made a fire. And he told everybody and said, behold, I accompanied the ghosts, and we went to fight. Many of our fellows were killed, and many of those who attacked us were killed. They said I was hit, but I did not feel sick. He told it all, and then he became quiet. When the sun rose, he fell down. Something black came out of his mouth. His face became contorted. The people jumped up and cried, and he was dead. Now Bartlett read this story about Native Americans to white Americans, and later had them recall the story, and they fit that story to fit their schemas. They changed it around. They recalled it in different orders. They recalled it differently. The story became noticeably shorter. He found that after 6 or 7 reproductions, it shrank from 330 words to 180 words. Despite becoming shorter and details being omitted, the story became more coherent. No matter how distorted it might become, it remains a story because participants are interpreting the story as a whole, both listening to it and then retelling it. The story becomes more conventional. It retains only the details that can be easily assimilated into one's existing culture. The story becomes more cliched, like a traditional story, and any individual or particular interpretations tend to be dropped. That people neglect information that doesn't fit, like the ghost. They distort the facts, like the canoe. They talk about boats for seals, maybe fish. Something black coming from his mouth tended to he frothed at the mouth, he vomited, breath escaped from his mouth. Hunting seals became fishing, canoes become boats, and paddles become oars. So people, in effect, are recalling things based on schemas. That we tend to fill in the details with incorrect things from the schemas that we have. When we encounter things repeatedly, we generalize to what we already know. So we bring things into bear with existing schemas, existing structures, existing information for solving that particular problem or situation. Schemata has a significant effect on how we organize disorganized information or ambiguous information. We make sense of it using our existing schemata. Narrative schemata specify expected components of a story, the time-related, event-related events, information that normally go into a story, the actions, the subplots and themes and so forth. We tend to try and reorder them based on what we already know. We try and correspond it to existing information in our brains. Many studies have shown that the use of schematic information is so powerful that listeners have little control over the retrieval strategies. In fact, it controls us. It helps us make sense of the world. They cannot do so when text contains certain types of omissions or certain sequences of events. Schema or scripts. We tend to assimilate and filter information based on what we know. They guide our attention. They allow us to make inferences. They allow us to predict what's going to happen. They allow us to live. In effect, schema and scripts, if we didn't have it, we'd probably go quite insane. We'd probably go, quite cuckoo or nuts. So they play an important role in just surviving daily into what to do in driving a car, in walking into a building, whatever events that we're going through. Schema and scripts are guiding us constantly. But there are times in which we don't want to have them, at least initially. We don't want to have them filtering or hampering our creativity and spontaneity, as I mentioned earlier. So they help us organize, they help us edit and summarize. In effect, they help us with our cognitive strategies that I talked about in another lecture in here. They help us reconstruct what happened and make meaning. So maybe the more experiences one has, the more events one's been exposed to, the more likely you'll have the schemas and scripts that will help you solve a problem later on or help you in a situation later on. So it's very critical to have existing schema or scripts from which to go by. We could make erroneous assumptions. We could invoke the wrong scripts. We could have an ill-structured script that's not well suited for the problem. We might not have the script available. We might not have seen something before. So they can, as I said, hamper creativity, interfere with learning, and so forth, which brings us into the last section of this chapter related to Ausubel's theories about the hierarchy of knowledge, about how we organize new information based on what we already know. That new information is meaningful to the extent to which it can be related, attached, and anchored to what we already have. What can we do as a teacher? What are things that we can do in a learning environment? We can help one learn based on what we already know. We can help people assimilate things in by using analogies, by using stories, quotes, just a simple quote of the day, or a recent CNN video that is very short and pithy that can anchor instruction. We can create a comparison and contrast table. We can create a hierarchical scheme. We can create a matrix. There are all sorts of ways in which we can, help people understand information. If you're studying religion, you might compare Buddhism and Christianity, for instance, on various components of it. If we're studying, computers, we might look at flow issues. We might have compare the brain, for instance, to a computer. We might create flowcharts for looking at digestive processes of the human species. We might look at advantages and disadvantages of things like hybrid cars compared to traditional gas-driven vehicles, or fuel cell cars, or electronic cars. So we have comparison and contrast. We have organizers. We could use jokes. We could use sayings. We could use quotes of the day. Anything to prime knowledge. Anything to get people to think about a particular instance or event that can be called up, a schema that might be brought to bear, and help one solve a particular problem. So that's something that we can do in effect. So there are many ways in which we can help and learn and so forth, but we don't want to do that. So in effect, we want to make sure that we have the most important script called up for that period of time. Now, Ausubel talked about, and others have talked about, advanced organizers. Not advanced organizers, but advanced, things that come before. That's what this means, that come before to set up, to help us understand information. It might be a concept map, it might be an organizational aid, it might be a notebook, it might be a comparison chart, a flow chart, a matrix, organizational charts. In effect, anything that helps us understand something better, an analogy, a metaphor. The structure of the atom is like the solar system. A hard disk is like a filing cabinet. White blood cells are like guards. Teaching is like a garden. Here we've got a visual depiction, a scenes segmenter that helps us understand driving, potentially, how to pass in a dangerous area. Visual cues are important. Is this an advanced organizer? No, there's nothing there. Now, if there are partially filled in things that you're walking people through and you gave them some of the answers before you started lecturing or talking, then it could be an advanced organizer. If you use this as an initial starter, but then give them something, give them some structure, give them some outlines. Instructional implications of Ausubel: to increase stability and clarity of anchoring ideas, usually using a spiral approach where you would teach the big ideas, those highest in the hierarchy, in a number of topics, and then successive passages or passes through it, you would begin to elaborate on the details. So give the big picture, give the big idea, and then give the details underneath. Give the quote, give the joke, give the analogy, and then lay things out underneath so that people gradually subsume those ideas. They can use that to anchor, that big idea, to anchor everything else underneath. Their knowledge has been primed. Their prior knowledge can be called to bear on a problem. So give the goals of the lesson. Where are you headed? Give the overview of the topics you're going to cover. And when you're done, like Ronald Reagan would do, he'd tell you what he was going to say, and when he was done, he told you what he said. He anchored your learning in what his speech would be about, and then he reminded you what he said so as to help you learn that information of what he just related to you. So advanced organizers, very important. Function or purpose of schema? Well, it can help with comprehension. It can help us link new to old. It can help make things stick. It can help create analogies. It can help for us to generate new knowledge, to start with some starter information. When to use schemas and scripts and anchors and all this? Well, oftentimes we might use advanced organizers when we don't have information already, when we're unfamiliar with an area, when we lack skills and knowledge, when it's an unstructured discipline that needs some context. That organization would help with the complexity, would help make sense of complex areas. When there are concepts that are similar in nature that need to be related or interrelated, you might provide that overview. They should not be used to review what was discussed in the last lecture. Ausubel felt that was not as useful because you're then focusing people back instead of pushing them ahead to something new. Not good to have advanced organizers, overviews, and abstracts. He found that abstracts were not an effective overview. Summaries of main ideas or instructional sequences was not a good advanced organizer. Abstract or high-level things were not good advanced organizers. Short passages and single theme typically don't need an advanced organizer. Something very quick doesn't need it. When the material is already organized, you typically don't need an advanced organizer. Positive results: these things really help for low ability students, to focus them, to help them organize, to help them make sense of information. An advanced organizer epitomizes ideas. It can help the students see the big picture before they're learning the details. It can help them make sense of different areas, to compare them, to see similarities as well as differences across different units that you're covering in a class. So those are some of the things related to advanced organizers. I want to thank you for hanging around this particular talk. I hope you learned something about schema theory, scripts, meaningfulness, and advanced organizers in creating hierarchical structures for students, letting them decide on the structures that work well for them, letting them decide on what is the most important or effective way to learn, so that in turn you can help them learn. You can provide some structures for them. You know, advanced organizers are powerful. Sometimes you might have students create their own advanced organizer. Scripts and schema theory is important. How you utilize those ideas in your classroom is going to be important. Making it meaningful, making things relevant, linking to prior knowledge, maybe giving them part of an advanced organizer and having them create the rest might be appropriate. But again, it may depend upon the task that you're involved in, the discipline, and the subject matter, as well as the age group of your students. There are many variables that will impact on the script or schema that you choose. Hopefully, you've learned something in this lesson. Hopefully, you've learned I'm a bit crazy, and sometimes I might just jump down to end a particular talk. Again, thank you all for coming to this section on scripts and schema theory and advanced organizers. I gave you one earlier by jumping off the desk, and now I've jumped again. Again, thank you very much, and we'll see you on another lesson down the road.